What do you know about the civil rights movement? And how much of what you know is a misconception? In this episode of The Five, we have 5 misconceptions and forgotten facts of this important time in American history. Welcome to The Five, where we share 5 interesting things in Black culture and history in every episode. But first, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Not just a Southern problem. Although much attention was and is still given to the civil rights movement in the South, the struggle for equality and desegregation was also taking place in the North. A civil rights movement truism once stated, "In the South, the white man doesn't care how close you get, as long as you don't get too high. In the North, he doesn't care how high you get, as long as you don't get too close." Northern cities like New York, Baltimore, Chicago, and Pittsburgh embraced segregation and forced Black people into the confines of overcrowded inner cities. Nonviolent struggles to end segregation and advance reform started taking place in the North well before the 1960s. One of the events that took place in New York City as part of the Northern struggle became the largest civil rights protest. Until this day, New York City has one of the most segregated public school systems in the country. The largest civil rights protest. The March on Washington, though massive and historical, was not the largest one-day protest during the civil rights movement. The title of largest civil rights protest goes to the 1964 New York City public school boycott, in which approximately 460,000 students refused to go to school on February 3rd to demand a swift desegregation of the city's public schools. The one-day boycott was planned by civil rights activist and pastor Milton Gallimason and organized by Bayard Rustin. Although segregation in school systems had been illegal in New York since 1920, housing segregation patterns predictably led to racially segregated school systems. The boycott demanded that the city come up with a plan to integrate schools in order to improve the education quality Black and Latino students received. Not a tired old woman. The story goes that Rosa Parks was a tired old woman who wouldn't give up her seat on a bus to a white man. But the reality is much deeper than that. Rosa Parks was an anti-segregation activist and the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. She had taken various civil rights trainings and comes from a family of activists. She was only 42 when she was arrested for her actions on the bus and is quoted as saying, "The only tired I was tired of giving in." The story of Rosa Parks that is told and taught in schools is that she's an everyday person who gained notoriety by one simple act on a bus. But that story discounts all that she had contributed to the civil rights movement before that point. She was a trained activist who was willing and ready to face the consequences of her actions, regardless of her being tired after a long day at work. The Forgotten March. The March on Washington is largely remembered by Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. What is often forgotten is the full title of the march, which is the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Economic justice was the top focus of the march. Dr. King, as well as organizers A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, understood that economic equality and justice was a massive step in reaching racial equality. The Poor People's Campaign, also known as Poor People's March on Washington, was planned in 1968. The full campaign took place between May 12th and June 24th of 1968. Few months before the campaign, Dr. King announced demands of the movement, including annual construction of affordable residences, full employment, and $30 billion to be designated for anti-poverty programs. Dr. King's assassination overshadowed this important cause that was a crucial part of the civil rights movement. The unsupported cause. It is difficult to imagine that Dr. King, Rosa Parks, and many other brave soldiers of the civil rights movement were once labeled as traitors and communists and were hated figures in their times, but they were. That's because the civil rights movement was not a supported cause by majority of Americans. In May 1961, in a Gallup survey, only 22% of Americans supported what the Freedom Riders were doing, and 57% of Americans said that the sit-ins at lunch counters and other demonstrations by activists were hurting the Negroes' chances of being integrated in the South. half a century after the movement, it is easy to think that today's heroes of Black History Month and American history were always beloved figures. These are just 5 misconceptions about the civil rights movement. Let us know in the comments some other ones we didn't mention. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next one.